Okay, it looks like this is live now. Okay, hold on. We got an alarm going off. Just 1 second. Okay, this is my alarm that tells me that it's time to start this. I was watching the clock. So let's dismiss this. I'm going to stall a bit to give people time to show up. Turn this off. That's not what I wanted. Got that turned. Okay, do not disturb. Okay. Since this is a lie, I am going to basically, and it's Q&A, I'm going to wait until someone shows up. I think maybe it would be best. Now, the difficult thing about this is because I don't have an iPhone, at least my understanding is it only works with an iPhone. I don't have the opportunity to send out the email that says, hey, come join me for the live. And I think it's supposed to send a link so you have it. I have to wait until it's time to go live to hit the button and say, hey, everybody, come join me for the live. Which means that no one knows or no one has the email until I guess the very last minute. So I'm basically sort of waiting for people to show up. Now, this actual live is not open to everyone. This is meant to be a perk, if you will, for subscribing to my email. If you subscribe to my emails, then you have access to me to be able to ask me questions. So it's basically those who signal that they want, that kind of information from me in part. Let's see, but what I've got here is I've got some questions from before that I have been asked. So a while back, I was trying out the whole chat feature, and I gotta admit, I'm not really thrilled with what I see with the chat feature very much. Um, I don't see it as all that useful. Maybe it is. Am I missing something? I don't know. But what I did before was I had asked. So I was thinking about doing some lives. What types of things would you like me to address? And so I did have some people give me some questions. And I thought what I would do since there's a replay going on here, or I should say not a replay, but a um was it a replay? Yeah, it'd be a replay. Yeah. Since I'm looking at possibly sending out the replay for this thing, what I thought I would do is go ahead and um answer these questions um before anyone, to start us off. Um oh, hello. Thank you for joining, Brandy. It's good to see you here. You are the first person in my first Q&A, so yay, welcome. Um, I've got some questions here, and from before that people have asked me, and I was going to start with those. But Brandy, before I start these, since you are here live, I want to give you the opportunity to ask a question if you have a question, and Bradley, you as well. So I am taking questions now. This thing kind of confuses me a little bit. So I might struggle to figure out how to do this. And my hope is that in the process of trying to look at the chat to see what your questions are, my hope is that I will not disconnect everybody somehow in the process, kind of like hanging up the phone, right? Um, no problem. What I'll do is I'm going to start us off with the question that I got some questions that people have asked me in the past in another chat. And one of those questions was, I'd like to know more about your personal journey and how your faith has transformed over time. Okay, this is a really big question. And I gotta admit, I don't know I can say it all in a half hour. So I'm gonna try to hit some highlights. Um so it's really a good one to start with because it's get to know me a little bit better so you can kind of get a better idea of where I'm coming from. So I grew up in a very small town, 600 people. Don't blink, you'll miss it when you're going through. So I grew up in a small town, and I would call it culturally conservative, culturally evangelical conservative in many respects. Because it's like almost, I mean, a lot of people went to church, and um, my parents were one of those who did not go to a church. Now they considered themselves Christian, but I only remember going to church only a couple of times when I was growing up, to be honest. Like a Christmas or actually an Easter type of thing, that kind of thing. But so I didn't really grow up in a church culture environment. Now my friends were in churches, and they had invited me into churches, and I went a couple of times on like youth group stuff, just for like a, trip to like do stuff and pizza, right? And I gotta admit, even though my friends were there, I always had that feeling like I didn't belong there somehow. I was very uncomfortable. And in my sense today, I would almost consider it to be sort of a mystical sense of you shouldn't be in this group type of thing, if you will. And I never really joined. But when I went to college, I learned about some different religions through history classes and such like that. And I also studied, um, I ended up studying 17th century England. It was my focus. And um, I, so I learned a lot about Christianity through history, if you will. But along with that, I learned a bit about Taoism through history as well. And I gotta say, I was really intrigued by this understanding of the Tao. Now, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Taoism, but basically the idea of the Tao is just the way of things. And I like to think of it as the animating way of things. But if you actually were to articulate and write out and describe the Tao, you would be wrong because the Tao is a mystery. And the moment you try to articulate mystery and to define mystery, you're going to fail. And so any Tao that you can talk about isn't really the Tao. I absolutely love this idea of the divine as mystery. And I did not see that in what I had seen in Christianity. And so I was asked once by someone who was I think it was called Campus Crusade for Christ. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but um, I was asked if I was Christian, and I said, well, I consider myself Christian with a Taoist bent. Okay, so there was that. But once I got out of college, I ended up rooming with a friend of mine who became a fundamentalist. And we had a lot of conversations about spirituality because I was very into spirituality. In fact, when I was in college, my roommate said to me, Bo, you take this spiritual stuff very seriously. Have you ever considered becoming a priest? And I'm like, and by the way, he's Catholic. And I'm like, actually, no, because that that's all about institutionalized religion. And that's something that I personally stand against, right? Little did I know what was going to happen, right? So, anyway, and then I ended up after college rooming with a friend of mine, and he became a fundamentalist, and I got into reading the Bible, and I really, really read the Bible. And when I was reading the Bible in the context of that sort of fundamentalist atmosphere, it kind of become a bit of a fundamentalist. And so I ended up on this literalist path somehow. And eventually I moved away, went up to Rockford, Illinois. And short version is I felt moved to join a church. And so I did join a church. And that's where I was baptized in a Presbyterian church there in Rockford, Illinois. And I was very fundamentalist in many respects in that time, at least in my mindset, very literalist. And then I also, so I did a lot of reading in the Bible, immersed myself in the Bible. Um, and I would read supplemental books, if you will, that were evangelical fundamentalist. And then I got a hold of historical critical stuff. I'm like, what is this? Right. And it was so very different from anything. It kind of traumatized me, to be honest. But what happened was I was reading one guy and he pointed out something. I think it was Hans Kuhn for some reason. I think it's a and he pointed out that in one place Solomon has 4,000 horses, and another it's 40,000 horses. I'm like, whoa, wait, that's that's not a matter of interpretation. That's a matter of it's a number. You can't rationalize 4,000 equals 40,000. I mean, you can say, was the person going up to the place or down to the place? Here it says up, here it says down. Well, because they were going up a hill, so it was up to the place, but down south. So it was going south, up a hill, hence up and down. You can't do that with numbers. And that broke open the system for me. And then I immersed myself in historical critical scholarship, and I went from conservative to raging liberal in less than a year. And then I ended up in seminary. And uh, this is going longer than I expected, so I'm going to speed things up. Sorry, but basically, I went to seminary, and there I really immersed myself in sort of postmodern stuff, if you will. And I was very interested in the question of what is the significance for postmodernity for the church. If the church is a modern institution, what is the significance of the fact that we've shifted paradigms? And oh look, I can make this go. Oh, so I can see we said okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to see what has been said. Oh yeah, yep. Apologetic versus systematic theology, very much so. Uh oh, okay, cool. Welcome, Jonathan. Um And so what was I saying? Oh, paradigms. So I was very interested in, what is the significance for postmodernity, this new postmodern paradigm for Christianity? How does it have to change, basically? And so my interest was in new church development. And I'm going to skip through a few more highlights here to kind of get us to basically today. I don't want to hit some key shifts in my changes in my theology. One was reading a book by Mark Taylor and another book by John D. Caputo. Both of those are radical theologians. And radical theology is a school that is different than a lot of theology out there. Um, uh, Basically, radical theology is uh, what you might call death of God theology. And it was really strongly influenced by postmodern thought. So it makes sense that I would be very interested in this, right? And so that radically changed the way I started looking at Christian theology. And I eventually ended up reading a book by Thomas J.J. Altizer called Christian Atheist. No, the New Christian Atheism, or an introduction to the New Christian Atheism, or new introduction to the Christian. Anyway, so something like that. And that was an absolutely fascinating take on the Christian story. And so for him, um, uh, uh, oops, did I just turn everything off? Is everybody here? Everybody here? Oh, yep, everybody's here. Okay, so anyway, for him, it's fascinating because God, the theistic God, the God out there, became incarnate in Jesus Christ. And then Jesus Christ died. And when Jesus Christ died, God died and then was released into all of creation. So for Altizer, the death of God is there used to be this distant God out there separate from creation. And then through the incarnation and crucifixion, God dies and then becomes radically incarnated in religion, in the world. And I thought that was absolutely crazy. It's like, wow, that's a different take on the story. And that has inspired me to think a little less traditionally, if you will. So there was that. And what has, I'll just bring us up to what would be the most recent thing that has changed the way I have changed my faith. Okay, I'm going to go to the beginning of the war in Ukraine because in many respects, I would say I was a pacifist up to that point. And then when I saw Russia invade Ukraine and the brutality of of just launching missiles into like hospitals, I was just absolutely stunned. And and it's like I felt like I had a Bonhoeffer moment. And if you don't know who Bonhoeffer is, Bonhoeffer was a theologian who's very much a pacifist in World War II. And then there was a point at which he was like, but something has to be done. We just can't let this go on. You can't just let people die. And so he was actually arrested in a failed assassination attempt of Hitler, and he was executed a few days before I believe the war had ended. But he had this moment where it's like it's one thing to say, it's one thing to support nonviolence, but it's another thing to just let that kind of insanity run rampant or something. You have to stop it. Basically, there's a point at which you have to not just say no, but you have to do something about it. And so I was really surprised because that was sort of, I'm going to call it my Bonhoeffer moment. Don't get me wrong, I'm very, very adamant about nonviolence, but I looked at it as when you've got a madman who is willing to just indiscriminately destroy human life like it's nothing, like it's inconsequential. What is the moral responsibility? What is the most loving thing to do for those who are victims, right? How would I like to be treated if I were, in their situation, if bombs were raining down upon me? Would I want someone to step in and stop it, right? Things like that. And that's still something that I'm wrestling with, actually, for what it's worth. Okay, so what do we got here? Um, uh, let's see. I'm gonna have to scroll up a little. Oh wait, what did I do wrong? Okay, am I doing this? Okay, seeing here, folks, narratives. We see you. Good. Hello. Interesting. Bradley Levitt. We have to learn when and how the Old Testament was written and the cultural aspects that influenced the writers. Yes, that's really important. Context is so important when reading the Bible, and that's one of the things that I learned with the historical critical method and other types of criticisms that are out there. Context really matters because um, when I was in high school, a friend of mine got a Webster's dictionary from, I want to say it's like 1890. I think it was 1890 was the year, and he showed me one of the entries in this. I don't know how he came across this. He was just flipping through and found it, but it said car. You know what a car is? A car is a two-wheeled cart pulled by a horse. That's the definition of a car. Okay. Fast forward 100 years, and if you say car, it means something completely different, exact same word. So context matters. Okay, my question from Brandy. Thank you very much. What is your experience with liberation theology and Black writers? Oh, absolutely wonderful question. So, I like liberation theology a lot. I unfortunately have not read as much about it as I would have liked to. We were introduced to. I was actually introduced to liberation theology before I went to seminary, and uh, and of course in seminary we read Gustavo Gutierrez, which is one of the seminal writers, and but there's a book that I absolutely adore. Um, and I shouldn't bring up a book that I can't remember the name. But okay, one book is Listening to the Least by Ian McFarlane. And I've looked for this book online and I've seen like really expensive versions of it, I think. But I got it when I was in seminary and I absolutely loved it. And the idea was it was about, and I talk a lot about authority. But one of the things is, it used to be like your authority is at the center. And now, when you think in terms of sort of, and I don't know that he was, I don't know the extent to which he is a liberation theologian, but he sounds like one to me. But the idea, because he's kind of tying the two together, but when you have a group of people, the authority of the center is directly proportional to the extent to which you're able to listen and give voice to those on the margins. Okay. And that has been an incredibly important work for me. Another one I want to, is it Sex in the Church? But basically, it's about liberation theology and gays and lesbians. This was a book written around the turn of the millennium, which is when this was a really, really hot topic in mainline Christianity before we started ordaining gays and lesbians. in general. Um, I have Cornell West's book. Cornell West is a black theologian. I cannot remember the name of the book, and I honestly haven't gotten too far into it, but I'm excited about getting further into that. Um, um, let's see, what else have I read? There's a wonderful book. I think it's called Native and Christian. It's about Native Americans and liberation theology. And that's a fascinating one because that's where you've got a group of people who are reading the story of Israel coming in and conquering their land, and it's like we look an awful lot like these people here. This might be part of our problem we're dealing with is these texts, and so that's a really important thing. Um, one group of writers I'd like to read more of is womanist theologians. I unfortunately don't recall reading anyone there. But no, that's there was another question. So yeah, so that's pretty much my experience with liberation theology and Black writers. I absolutely love it. It was called back in my days of seminary, possibly the most postmodern of all theologian or theologies, because it took that whole top-down understanding of things, and it said that what we need to be listening to is God moving in the midst of community. Right. So it's a good example of pushing authority to the margins, to the people, in the voices of people who are, shall we say, underrepresented in the center of power. And we have a lot of power structures in our society, whatever the power structure happens to be. Thank you very, very much, Brandy, for that question. Wonderful question. Um, any other questions out there? Oh, someone joined, and I don't know who it was. Who else has joined here that I haven't said? I said hello to Jonathan. I said hello to. Is there a way for me to see who's on here? Is that possible? Bradley. I said hello to Bradley. Who am I missing? I'm gonna hit a button, and hopefully it doesn't mess things up. Oh wait. Okay, this is funny. You know who the fourth person is? It's me. Okay. So, okay. Any other questions out? Let me hit this. See if I can pop up. If we don't, then I am going to go to some questions that people have asked me elsewhere. Let's see. Um, this is a question someone had sent me. Oh, wait. Do I feel like my time in fundamentalism was anti-intellectual? Um, that's a really good question. And short answer is yes. But at the time, I would never have considered it anti-intellectual. In fact, I would have considered it to be very intellectual. I had a conversation with a pastor. We were talking about fundamentalism and how they don't have scholarship. And we have scholarship and they don't have scholarship. And I said, well, I think it's scholars. They do have scholarship. It's just a different kind of scholarship. And so for me, I tend to describe their scholarship as I think I talked about this in my last live where I talk about Dan McClellan and scholarship, biblical scholarship. My last live, you can find it on my um, newsletter blog, the homepage. It's there, and it's the live. I can't remember what the title of it is, but anyway, I tend to think of it as uh, dogmatic biblical scholarship and academic biblical scholarship. Dogmatic biblical scholarship basically says we have the truth and the Bible is going to prove our truth. And of course, you cannot critically, look at the Bible at that point because we know that the Bible is going to align with our truth somehow, and we're going to make it work somehow, even if we have to make stuff up. So, because we're not making stuff up, it just must obviously truly be that way because there can't be a misalignment. And then you've got academic biblical scholarship, which is really about seeking truth. And it does not assume the dogma of the church or any denomination or anything like that. It assumes that the texts were written in history by people who lived in history as human beings who were fallible, and they reflected their culture in their writings, and they were speaking to their culture in their writings. And so that's a very different approach to scholarship. And to be honest, while I say that there are two different types of scholarship, I really don't consider dogmatic biblical scholarship to actually be what I would consider actual scholarship. I say scholarship because I'm saying that really they consider it to be a scholarship. I don't consider it to be scholarship. There's a book by Mark Knoll called The Scandal of the Evangelical Mind, by the way, and he's an evangelical. And he wrote this when he was at Wheaton, got in trouble for this one. Um, and basically, the opening line of the book is something like, the scandal of the evangelical mind is that there isn't really an evangelical mind to speak of, or something like that. Um, and then he goes on to talk about problems with the evangelicals, and mainly that they are anti-intellectual, quite frankly. So, since deconstructing and decolonizing my faith, I felt extremely dumb. Like, how did I believe all the nonsense? You know, um, this is probably not going to help, but here's my thought on that. You believe a lot of nonsensical things right now that you're unaware of. Because I know, because I'm there too. There are a lot of things that I think of that I believe that are completely nonsensical, I'm sure, and I don't even know it. Have you ever gone and thought, you're having an argument with someone about something and they bring something up and it's about politics or whatever. And you're like, I don't know if that's true or not, but you want to argue against it. Then you look it up and it's like, oh, that's actually true. Huh. And then you realize what you believed was nonsense. I picked it up off of whatever media station, right? Or whatever media mouthpiece. And I never really bothered to look it up because you can't fact check everything that comes in. And so there was a sense that when you go through life, you just have to take a certain amount of stuff on faith, right? If someone tells you that the cheapest gas station is down the road that way, you're probably not going to look them all up to find out which one is the cheapest. You're probably just going to say, okay, cool, I'll work with that, right? And that's just life. We're always discovering things that we were wrong about. And I think that part of growing up, and we're not all, and I part of me doesn't want to grow up, but part of me does, um part of growing up is learning to accept that, oh, I was wrong about that, and move on with life, right? And when you learn to do that and go, oh, I was wrong about that, oh well, let's chalk that one up to another thing I was wrong about. And then you get kind of used to being wrong, and when you get used to being wrong more and more and more, you stop taking yourself as seriously as you used to. You stop having your ego, your identity wrapped up in the knowledge and the stuff that you have inside of you. So that's my thought on that. Um, any any other questions out there that anyone would like to ask? Being wrong for 26 years hit me hard. It took me a while to shake my fear of doctrines. Oh yeah, I was down bad for a few months. Um, we do need to keep learning. Absolutely, Bradley. Yeah. Those two comments like really go together. I think we do need to keep learning. But what is interesting is that the 26 years there, Brandy, the longer you stick with it. Oh, it says my internet connection is unstable for some reason. I don't know why. I think so. I think we're good. Okay. But the longer we I don't want to say get stuck in something. I'm going to say get stuck because anyway. So the longer we get stuck in something, the harder it is to get out of it. The more painful it is to get out of it. And so I mean, so when I went through my deconstruction, which, and I try to remind myself that I was really in the fundamentalist phase of things for a relatively short period of time because I didn't grow up in the church, right? So I didn't have this from birth. Um, but when I was reading one book in particular, I was aghast at how could a Christian say these things, right? Like Mary wasn't born of a virgin. Really? That's horrible. How could you say that? How did we get Jesus then? And all of this stuff. But I was honestly, it's embarrassing now to say it, but I was so angry at this book, I couldn't sleep. And but there was something in it that made me want to keep finding out where is this coming from, you know? And I'm glad I did push through all of that rage, but it's interesting because deconstruction can really mess you up because this is your meaning making process. This is how you understand the world around you and how it works. And it's like taking and ripping the rug out from under everything that, you know, in your living room and everything falls over and your life is a mess. It's horribly, horribly painful for many. And and I try to tell myself that I went through this horrible experience, but there are many people who were in systems longer, and what I experienced is nothing in comparison to what they experienced, right? Because there's a lot of unpacking to do. Any other questions out there? Ah, I just realized. Wait, is that right? Is that clock right? 7:30? 7:30. Well, this is supposed to be a half hour. If you don't mind, everybody who's here, let me know what you thought. Would you like me to do more of these? Is this something that because what I'm trying to do with my newsletter is I'm trying to uh, basically make it the best I can, and part of that is putting out the stuff that people want. Because if I'm going to put out bowls of ramen noodle and everybody else wants chocolate, then, they're not, going to be as interested in sitting down at my table, if you will. And so I want to find ways to meet people where they are with what they're looking for the purposes of like spiritual growth and development, especially. I mean, there are three buckets I like to think of them as that I try to fill on my Substack. And number one is Christianity. So I'll talk about Christianity, past, present, especially future. I'm very interested in future Christianity and what we, the question that haunts me is into what is Christianity evolving? Because I do believe it is evolving. Another thing is spiritual growth and development, because that is a major interest of mine, helping people to grow spiritually. And the third thing is theology with an emphasis on radical theology. So let's see. Oh, you're very welcome, Brandy. One of the things I thought about doing one of these days is putting together a an article about like my top 10 books that are probably the ones that I like the most. But if you want to see other book recommendations, you could go to my website, evolvingchristianfaith.net. And there is a page there where I've got like a series of books that I recommend in general. I didn't want to make it too big. I just wanted to keep it relatively short and allow people different things that people could look at that might help them. Like I think Liberation Theology is on there. I think the Cornell West book is on there. I know the John Shelby Spong book is on there, and so on. Okay. Any last thoughts? Anybody else wants to throw into the chat while we're waiting? Or I should say before I take off. I got Bradley, I got Brandy, and I got, hold on, someone else is there. I got Jonathan. Oh, that was very loud. Any other thoughts? Okay, well, not hearing any thoughts. Well, first of all, I'm going to take a drink because I know it's a little harder to type just in case people are typing. I can't tell if people are typing. But thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate this. I got to admit, I wasn't really sure if anyone was going to show up tonight. And so I was thrilled to death that we've got people. And I will consider the possibility of doing these again in the future. I'm not sure how often, possibly monthly, possibly weekly. It depends on what I decide. But anyway, thank you again, everyone. And you have a wonderful evening. Bye bye. Oh, I'm over here. Bye bye.